Dr. Emma Thompson walked slowly through the crowded airport terminal. Her feet hurt from standing for so many hours. Her white coat was wrinkled and stained from the long surgery she had just finished. She had been working for 18 hours, straight to save a little boy's life. The operation was successful, but Emma was exhausted. Emma's hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail. Dark circles under her eyes showed how tired she was. She carried a small bag and walked toward Gate 12, where her flight was waiting. All she wanted was to get home to her family and rest. The terminal was busy with people rushing to catch their flights. Children were crying. Announcements echoed through the speakers. And travelers dragged their luggage behind them. Emma moved through the crowd quietly, thinking about the little boy she had just saved. His parents had cried with joy when she told them their son would be okay. At Gate 12, Emma saw the first-class boarding line. She reached into her pocket and pulled out her boarding pass. The airline had upgraded her ticket because of her frequent travels for medical conferences. Emma had given a speech about helping poor children get free surgery. James, the gate agent, was a tall man with short brown hair. He sat behind the counter typing on his computer. When he looked up and saw Emma approaching, his face changed. He looked at her wrinkled clothes and tired appearance with suspicion. "Excuse me, miss," James said in a cold voice. "I think you're in the wrong line. This is for first-class passengers only." Emma was surprised by his tone, but she smiled politely. She was used to people judging her by her appearance. "I have a first-class ticket, sir. Here it is." She held up her boarding pass for him to see. James barely looked at the ticket. He shook his head and frowned. There must be some mistake. This can't be right. He stared at Emma again, his eyes full of doubt. "Are you sure you didn't pick up someone else's ticket by accident?" Other passengers waiting in line began to notice what was happening. Some turned round to watch. A few people pulled out their phones, sensing that something unfair was taking place. Emma felt embarrassed but tried to stay calm. "I promise you, this is my ticket," Emma said gently. "I'm Dr. Emma Thompson, and I'm returning from a medical conference in London. I spoke about providing free surgery to children in need." But James had already decided what he thought about Emma. He looked at her simple clothes and tired face and made up his mind. He called over to his supervisor, Michael, who was standing nearby. "We have a situation here," James said loudly enough for everyone to hear. "This woman is trying to board first class, but I don't think she belongs there." The words hurt Emma's feelings, but she kept her dignity. She had faced this kind of treatment before because of her race and simple appearance. She knew that getting angry would only make things worse. Instead, she stood straight and tall, even though her heart was heavy. A young woman named Lucy was waiting to board the same flight. She had been watching the whole situation unfold. Lucy could see that something very unfair was happening right in front of her eyes. She quietly took out her phone and started recording everything. "This isn't right," Lucy whispered to herself. Her heart was breaking for the woman who was being treated so poorly. She could see that Emma was kind and patient, even though she was being mistreated. Michael, the supervisor, walked over with the same suspicious look as James. He crossed his arms and looked Emma up and down. "What seems to be the problem here?" he asked. "She claims to have a first-class ticket," James explained. "But look at her. Does she look like a first-class passenger to you?" Emma felt the eyes of everyone round her. People were staring, whispering, and pointing. Some looked uncomfortable with what they were seeing. Others seemed to agree with the gate agents. But Emma refused to let the judgment break her spirit. She thought about all the lives she had saved over the years. She remembered the children who had hugged her after their surgeries. She thought about the parents who had thanked her for giving their kids a chance at life. She knew who she was and what she had accomplished. That knowledge gave her strength. "I understand there might be some confusion," Emma said calmly, "but I can show you my identification and medical license if that would help." James rolled his eyes. "Anyone can fake those things," he said rudely. Lucy continued recalling, her anger growing with each passing moment. She could see that Emma was being treated unfairly because of how she looked. It made her sick to watch. More passengers gathered round to see what was happening. Some looked ashamed of what they were witnessing. Others seemed curious about the drama, but Emma stood there with grace and dignity, refusing to let their stares hurt her. She had spent her entire career helping others, regardless of their background or ability to pay. She had saved thousands of lives and asked for nothing in return. Now she was being treated like a criminal just because she didn't look like what they expected a first-class passenger to look like. But Emma knew her worth. She knew the good work she had done, and she knew that eventually the truth would come out. The sound of heavy boots echoed through the terminal as the security guards walked quickly toward Gate 12. Their uniforms were dark blue, and their faces looked serious. James, the gate agent, waved them over with his hand. "She's causing a disturbance," James said loudly, pointing at Emma. He didn't care that other passengers could hear every word. "She won't accept that she's in the wrong line and keeps insisting she belongs in first class." The security guards were named Robert and David. Robert was a tall man with gray hair, and David was younger with a stern expression. They walked straight to Emma without asking questions or trying to understand what was really happening. They only saw what James wanted them to see. A tired black woman in wrinkled clothes who didn't look wealthy. "Mom, we need you to step aside," Robert said in a firm voice. His tone was not friendly or kind. "There seems to be some confusion about your ticket." Emma felt her heart sink into her stomach. She had hoped the situation would not get worse, but now security was involved. She knew this would be even more embarrassing, but she decided to cooperate completely. "Of course," Emma said quietly, her voice soft and respectful. "I'm happy to show you my identification and ticket again." By now, a large crowd had gathered round Gate 12. Passengers from other flights had stopped to watch what was happening. Many people held up their phones, recording everything they saw. Some passengers shook their heads in disgust, clearly upset by the unfair treatment they were witnessing. Others looked uncomfortable but said nothing, afraid to get involved. Lucy, the young woman who had been watching from the beginning, could not stay silent any longer. She stepped forward and spoke directly to the security guards. "Excuse me," Lucy said bravely. "I've been standing here the whole time. This woman has done nothing wrong. She's been completely respectful and polite." Robert and David barely looked at Lucy. They acted as if her words didn't matter at all. They were focused only on Emma, treating her like she was a problem that needed to be solved, not a human being who deserved respect. Emma reached into her purse and pulled out her medical license and identification card. Her hands were steady, even though she felt humiliated inside. "I'm Dr. Emma Thompson," she said calmly. "I'm a neurosurgeon. I just finished operating on a 7-year-old child who was in a car accident. I've been awake for 20 hours straight, and I simply want to get home to my family." The security guards took Emma's documents and looked at them carefully. Robert held up her medical license to the light, checking if it was real. David examined her driver's license and passport. Everything was clearly authentic and in order. But even after seeing the proof, their expressions did not change. They seemed determined to side with James and Michael, the gate agents. Despite the clear evidence that Emma belonged exactly where she was, There might be some mix-up with the computer system, David suggested, though he made no effort to actually check the computer. Maybe you should consider taking a different flight. Emma felt the weight of every stare in the terminal. She could hear people whispering about her. She saw phone cameras pointed in her direction from every angle. Some passengers looked angry at how she was being treated. Others seemed to enjoy the drama. But Emma also felt something else deep inside her. She felt the strength that came from knowing she had spent her entire life helping others. She thought about all the children she had saved, regardless of whether their families could pay for the surgery. She remembered the free clinics she had started in poor neighborhoods. She thought about the medical students she had trained to help others. "I will wait here peacefully," Emma said with quiet dignity. Her voice was calm and strong. "I know who I am, and I know what I've done with my life. That's enough from me." Lucy felt tears in her eyes as she watched Emma's grace under pressure. She continued recording everything, knowing that the world needed to see this injustice. More passengers began to speak up. An elderly white man stepped forward and said, "This is wrong. You're treating this woman terribly for no reason." A mother holding her baby said, "She has every right to be here. Look at her ticket and her identification. What more do you need?" But the security guards and gate agents ignored these voices. They seemed to have made up their minds based on Emma's appearance, not on facts or evidence. Emma stood there with her head held high, surrounded by people who judged her without knowing her story. She thought about the little boy she had just saved. His parents had cried with joy when she told them their son would live. That memory gave her strength. The situation was becoming more tense by the minute. Other flights were being delayed because of the crowd that had gathered. Passengers were missing their connections. But still, the airport staff refused to admit they were wrong. Emma remained calm and patient, showing everyone round her what true strength looked like. She knew that eventually the truth would come out. She just had to wait and keep her dignity intact. The cockpit door opened with a soft click, and Captain William Harris stepped out into the terminal. His pilot uniform was perfectly pressed, with gold stripes on his sleeves and a captain's hat on his head. His face looked serious and concerned as he walked toward the gate where all the commotion was happening. Captain Harris was a tall man with kind eyes and graying hair at his temples. He had been flying for 25 years and had never seen such a delay at one of his gates. The passengers were supposed to be boarding by now, but instead, a large crowd had gathered round the first-class line. "What's the hold-up, Captain?" Harris asked James, his voice carrying the authority of someone who was used to being in command. "We should have started boarding 15 minutes ago." James straightened up when he saw the captain approaching. He pointed toward Emma, who was still standing quietly with her documents in her hand. "This woman is claiming to have a first-class ticket," James began to explain, "but we don't think she really belongs in." Captain Harris stopped listening mid-sentence. His eyes had found Emma in the crowd, and suddenly his face went completely white. The color drained from his cheeks as if he had seen a ghost. His mouth fell open in shock, and his eyes grew wide with disbelief. "Dr. Thompson," he whispered, his voice barely audible above the noise of the terminal. Emma looked up from where she had been standing patiently. When she saw the captain, she gave him a small, tight smile. Despite everything that had happened, her expression was warm and kind. "Hello, Captain Harris," Emma said softly. The captain's eyes immediately filled with tears. His hands began to shake as powerful memories came flooding back to him. He stared at Emma as if he couldn't believe what he was seeing. The woman who had been treated so poorly by his airline staff was someone very special to him. Captain Harris walked quickly to the gate microphone. His voice was shaking as he picked it up and began to speak. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, his words echoing through the terminal, "we have the great honor of having Dr. Emma Thompson aboard our flight today." The busy terminal began to grow quiet. Passengers stopped talking and turned to listen. James and the security guards looked confused. They didn't understand why their captain seemed so emotional about this woman they had been treating like a problem 6 months ago. Captain Harris continued, his voice breaking with emotion. "This incredible woman saved my daughter's life." A loud gasp went through the crowd. People looked at each other in shock. Lucy, who had been recording everything on her phone, felt her heart start racing. She realized she was witnessing something truly extraordinary. "My little girl, Sophie, was in a terrible car accident," Captain Harris said, tears now flowing freely down his face. "She was only 8 years old. She was rushed to the hospital with a severe head injury that was bleeding inside her brain." The entire gate area had fallen completely silent. Even the security guards, Robert and David, were listening with their mouths open. Their expressions were starting to change as they began to understand what was happening. "Every doctor we saw told us the same thing," the captain continued, his voice getting stronger. "They said there was nothing they could do. They told my wife and me to prepare for the worst. They said we should say goodbye to our little girl." Emma stood quietly in the crowd, her eyes looking down at the floor. She felt uncomfortable with all the attention, but she was moved by the captain's words and the pain in his voice. But Dr. Thompson refused to give up on Sophie. Captain Harris said, his voice filled with admiration. "When every other doctor had walked away, she stayed. She worked on my daughter for 14 straight hours. She didn't leave the operating room once. She didn't take breaks to eat or rest." The crowd was hanging on every word. Some people were crying as they listened to the story. Others were looking at Emma with no understanding and respect. Dr. Thompson fought for Sophie's life as if she were fighting for her own child. The captain continued, "She used techniques that other doctors wouldn't try. She took risks that others were afraid to take. She gave everything she had to save a little girl she had never met before." Emma felt tears in her own eyes as she remembered that difficult night. She thought about little Sophie and how scared her parents had been. She remembered the moment when she knew the surgery had worked and that the little girl would live because of this woman's incredible skill and dedication. Captain Harris said, his voice now strong and proud, "My daughter is alive today. She's playing soccer again. She's laughing again. She's going to have a full and beautiful life." The crowd erupted in whispers and gasps. People were looking at Emma with amazement and respect. James, the gate agent, felt his face turn red with shame as he began to understand the terrible mistake he had made. Captain Harris was not finished telling him a story. His voice grew stronger and more confident as he continued to speak into the microphone. The entire terminal seemed to hold its breath as he shared more incredible details about the woman who had been treated so poorly. Double quotes, Dr. Thompson didn't just save my daughter's life and walk away, he said, his admiration clear in every word. After the surgery was over, she visited Sophie every single day for 3 weeks. She brought her favorite books, colorful toys, and most importantly, she brought hope to our family. The crowd listened in complete amazement. People were looking at Emma with new eyes, seeing her not as someone who didn't belong, but as a hero who had been hiding in plain sight. James, the gate agent, felt his stomach drop as he began to understand the terrible magnitude of his mistake. But that's not all this remarkable woman has done. Captain Harris continued, his voice growing with emotion. I learned that Dr. Thompson runs 3 free medical clinics in poor neighborhoods across the city. She operates on children who can't afford surgery. She's donated millions of her own money to medical research to help find cures for diseases that affect children. Lucy's phone was still recording everything. She could see that a video was already being shared online, spreading rapidly across social media as people realized they were witnessing something incredible. Comments were pouring in from viewers who couldn't believe what they were seeing. She's received awards from the Queen herself for her humanitarian work, the captain said proudly. She's saved thousands and thousands of lives, and she's never asked for anything in return. Not money, not fame, not recognition. She just helps people because it's the right thing to do. Emma finally looked up from the floor. Her eyes met those of Robert and David, the security guards who had treated her so poorly just minutes before. There was no anger in her expression, no hatred or desire for revenge. There was only sadness for the way people could judge others so quickly without knowing their story. Last year, Captain Harris continued, when the children's hospital couldn't afford new equipment for the pediatric ward, Dr. Thompson paid for it herself. She bought new computers, games, and books to make sick children feel better while they recovered from their illnesses. James, the gate agent, felt tears streaming down his face. His own daughter had been sick the year before with a serious illness, and he remembered how grateful he had been to the doctors and nurses who helped her get better. Now, he realized he had treated one of those angels with cruelty and suspicion. Dr. Thompson has traveled to Africa, Asia, and South America to perform free surgeries on children who would otherwise die, the captain said, his voice filled with respect. She's trained hundreds of doctors to carry on her work in their own countries. She's literally changed the world, one child at a time. The silence in the terminal was profound and moving. People were crying as they listened to the story. Some were sharing Lucy's video on their phones, spreading the word about what they had witnessed. Others were looking at Emma with new understanding and deep respect. They realized they had witnessed something terrible, the discrimination against a woman who had dedicated her entire life to helping others. Michael, the supervisor, felt ashamed of his actions. He thought about his own family and how he would feel if someone treated his wife or daughter the way they had treated Emma. He realized that they had judged her based on her appearance and nothing else. She works 18-hour days regularly. Captain Harris continued. She's missed family dinners, holidays, and vacations to save the lives of children she's never met. She's given up her own comfort and happiness to make sure other people's children can live. An elderly woman in the crowd began to clap slowly. Soon, other passengers joined her. The applause grew louder and stronger until the entire terminal was filled with the sound of people showing their respect for Emma. Dr. Thompson has donated her time to teach medical students. The captain said, she's written books about surgical techniques that have helped doctors around the world. She's funded scholarships for students who want to become doctors but can't afford medical school. Emma felt overwhelmed by the attention. But she also felt grateful that people were finally understanding who she really was. She thought about all the children she had helped over the years and how their smiles had made every sacrifice worth it. And we almost didn't let her board her flight, Captain Harris said quietly, his voice filled with shame. We almost treated one of the most important people in the world like a criminal. We almost denied her the basic respect that every human being deserves. The crowd was completely silent now, absorbing the full weight of what had happened. They had witnessed not just discrimination, but the discrimination of someone who had spent her life making the world a better place. Lucy continued recording. knowing that this story needed to be shared with the world. She wanted people to understand that heroes don't always look the way we expect them to look. James, the gate agent, could no longer hold back the flood of emotions that was washing over him. His hands were shaking, and his face had turned bright, red with shame. Tears were streaming down his cheeks as he walked slowly toward Emma. Every step felt heavy with regret. "Dr. Thompson," James said, his voice breaking and trembling, "I am so very sorry. I have no excuse for how I treated you today. I judged you based only on how you looked. And I was completely and terribly wrong." Emma looked at James with eyes full of compassion and understanding. She could see the pain in his face and the genuine remorse in his tears, instead of seeing an enemy who had hurt her. She saw a human being who had made a mistake and was truly sorry for it. "James," Emma said gently, her voice soft and kind, "we all make errors in judgment sometimes. What really matters is not the mistake we made, but what we choose to do next." The security guards, Robert and David, also walked over to Emma. They both removed their hats and held them in their hands as a sign of respect. Their faces showed genuine remorse for their actions, and they looked ashamed of how they had treated her. "I have a daughter who's about your age," Robert said quietly, his voice filled with emotion. "If someone treated her the way we treated you today, I would be absolutely heartbroken. I'm truly and deeply sorry for my behavior." Emma nodded with understanding and grace. She could see that Robert was a good man who had made a bad choice. "Your daughter is very lucky to have a father who can learn from his mistakes and become a better person," she said kindly. David also spoke up, his voice barely above a whisper. "I was wrong to assume things about you. I should have listened and been more respectful. I promise to do better in the future." Lucy, who had been recording everything on her phone, approached Emma carefully. Her eyes were bright with excitement and amazement at what she had witnessed. "Dr. Thompson," Lucy said, "your story is already going viral on social media. People all over the world are seeing what happened here today. They're sharing your story and talking about how wrong this treatment was." Within just a few hours, the airline CEO, Margaret Collins, called the gate personally. She had been watching Lucy's video online and was horrified and embarrassed by what she saw happening at her airline. "Dr. Thompson," Margaret said over the phone, her voice filled with sincere regret, "I want to apologize on behalf of our entire company. What happened to you today should never have occurred. We are implementing immediate changes to ensure this type of discrimination never happens again." The CEO announced that all airline staff across the country would receive special training about unconscious bias and treating all passengers with dignity and respect. She also invited Emma to help design the training programs so that other people wouldn't have to experience what she had gone through. As Emma finally walked toward the plane to board, something magical happened. Every single passenger in the terminal stood up and began to applaud. The standing ovation lasted for several minutes, with people clapping, cheering, and some even crying with joy. But Emma remained humble through it all, waving gently to the crowd and walking quietly to her seat. James, the gate agent, enrolled in sensitivity training that very same week. He was so moved by what had happened that he became an advocate for change within the airline. He began sharing his story with other employees and working hard to ensure that every passenger would be treated with respect and kindness, regardless of how they looked. 6 months later, the entire airline had transformed its culture completely. Discrimination complaints dropped to nearly zero, and the company became known throughout the industry for its inclusive policies and respectful treatment of all passengers. Other airlines began copying their training programs. Emma continued her work as she always had, saving lives and helping others in need. But now she also used a newfound platform to speak at conferences and in interviews about the importance of treating everyone with kindness and dignity. We never really know, Emma said in one famous interview, what battles someone else is fighting in their life, or what good they've done in the world. The safest and best thing we can do is to treat everyone as if they matter deeply. Because they do. The story of what happened at Gate 12 became a powerful reminder that heroes don't always look the way we expect them to look. Emma's grace under pressure and her willingness to forgive those who had wronged her inspired millions of people around the world. James kept a photo of Emma on his desk at work as a daily reminder to treat every person with respect. Robert and David also changed their approach to their jobs, becoming known for their kindness and fairness. The little boy Emma had saved before her flight grew up healthy and strong. When he learned about what had happened to the doctor who saved his life, he decided to become a doctor himself, inspired by her example of helping others. Emma's story proved that even in the darkest moments, there is always hope for a change, forgiveness, and transformation. The end.